Welcome to Special Grand Rounds today. I'm Noelle Spears. I'm the Vice Chair for Education for the Department of Pediatrics, and we are so excited to have all of you here today in person for a very special Women in Medicine Grand Rounds. We will be hybrid for the foreseeable future, and so we welcome both online and hear feedback on how that process goes. For the folks online, you'll be able to submit Q&A during the talk. And for those of you here, please ask your questions live. For those of you online, we'll have a meet and greet after the talk is over. And in order to unmute and put on your video, you can chat the host, Savannah, and ask to turn on your camera and mic. So we are thrilled to have Dr. Nancy Spector here with us today. Dr. Spector is a professor of pediatrics and serves at the Drexel University College of Medicine as the executive director of the Hedwig von Amerigen Executive Leadership in Academic Medicine program known as ELAM. It is a part-time year-long national leadership program that is very prestigious for women in academic medicine, dentistry, public health, and pharmacy. She also serves as the executive director of the Executive Leadership in Healthcare program for women leaders in hospital and healthcare systems. In addition to these roles, she serves as the Senior Vice Dean for Faculty, the Betty A. Cohen Chair in Women's Health, and the Executive Director of the Lynn Yackel Institute for Women's Health and Leadership. She is known for her leadership and facilitation skills and is a sought-after speaker. Her contributions to academic medicine are in leadership skills development, professional development, gender equity, mentoring and sponsorship, which we'll talk about today, and curriculum development and implementation. She is a member of PROUD, promoting and respecting our women doctors. She has been the educational leader of the award-winning, that you may know, IPASS Handoff Study Group, and serves as the chair of the IPASS Executive Council and co-founder of the IPASS Safety Institute. Dr. Spector is a graduate of Brown University and the University of Massachusetts Medical School. She completed her residency, chief residency, and general academic pediatric fellowship at St. Christopher's Hospital for Children. Dr. Spector was elected into AOA and is a member of the Society for Pediatric Research and the American Pediatric Society. She has received numerous awards for teaching and mentoring, too many. I could probably spend an hour discussing all of them. Some of them include the Robert S. Holm Award for her extraordinary contribution to Pediatric Program Director Leadership from the APPD, the Miller-Sarkin Mentoring Award from the APA, and the Elizabeth Bingham Award from the Association for Women in Science. She has been invited to join numerous leadership efforts at the national level in organizations such as AMWA, the AAMC, the AAP, ACOG, the AHA, the AMA, and that list goes on too. We are honored to have her here today to celebrate with us, and please invite you to the panel for women leaders and trainees at the hospital following her meet and greet. Dr. Spector.
Thank you so much. And it is wonderful to be here in person. I'm very excited to join you. And I love being here with fellow pediatricians. I don't always get to speak with and meet with and enjoy the company of fellow pediatricians. So thank you for having me. And I'm going to speak to you today about some concepts that are near and dear to my heart, really focusing on how we all together as an academic medicine community really need to move to a culture of mentorship, sponsorship, and allyship. And I truly believe that's what we need to do to be able to change the systemic issues that we have in our organizations that are not allowing the ascension of a very diverse group of people to leadership. So I'm going to speak to you about those ideas, and I will give you some ideas of how we can change things immediately and in the future. I do have disclosures in that I have received grant funding from several federal agencies, and I do co-founded and hold equity interest in the IPASS Patient Safety Institute, have received monetary awards and honoraria for travel. Luckily, again, that stopped for a long time. And I have been to multiple organizations to promote ideas around scholarship for mentorship, sponsorship, and physician performance and handoff care. So to take us through the journey, I'm going to discuss the importance of leadership in these very difficult times. And we used to think of this pandemic as an acute crisis. It's now quite prolonged, and now we have syndemics to worry about. So we have to think about how to be resilient leaders in this time. And I'm going to, again, focus on that necessity of mentorship, sponsorship, and allyship to fight the injustice that we have been suffering through. I thought I received that really beautiful introduction. Thank you very much. But I thought I'd tell you a little bit about my personal story and why I do the work that I do. And it starts way back with my family. So up in the left-hand corner, those are my parents and my brother. You can tell since it's black and white around what age group I'm in. My parents were both teachers, educators. And in the 60s, when I was a little kid, my parents said to my brother and I, you can do anything you want in your career, in your life. You cannot be a teacher. And I thought, oh, wow, that's pretty significant. The reason is they had taught in secondary schools and primary schools, and they felt that teachers at that time were undercompensated, underrespected, didn't have enough advancement opportunities. So I went on to be a doctor. My brother went on to be a lawyer. My mom was really happy about that. And as we grew up, they advanced in their careers. And my dad ended up going to, he was in college education as an education leader, and he went into Brown Medical School. Anybody here from Brown? So he led the curriculum of Brown for many, many years. His name is Dick Dawes. So most people don't know he's my dad, and they say, wait, I thought he was my dad, because he's so wonderful. He went into medical education, inspired by me in my third year when he learned all about the intricacies of medical education. And my mom went on to be the assistant superintendent of schools at a big district outside of Boston. So they did ascend in leadership. I went on to college and medical school. And by the way, when I went to medical school, I was the first doctor in my family. And I remember sitting in the amphitheater, and I did not know there was anything called a rotation. I didn't even know what that meant. So I was really naive. And so I sort of went through my career in medical school, not understanding what it was to be a doctor. Luckily at UMass, we had some real iconic mentors, including Evan Charney and Ken Roberts, who many of you know, who really inspired me to go into pediatrics. Then I went on to St. Christopher's, where the man at the top, in the middle between my three little kids, who are now 26, 25, and 23, but don't allow me to take pictures of them anymore. So I use the little kid picture. He was the first person to recognize potential in me. In my first inpatient floor rotation in pediatrics as a resident, he said to me, you know, Nancy, you should consider academic medicine. And before then, I thought I was going to go into private practice in the suburbs. I did the opposite of that by being a faculty member in an inner city safety net hospital for many, many years. And he saw something in me, and he is to this day my mentor. He served as a vice chair, then the chair of pediatrics, Dan Shidlow. He was then the dean of our medical school and helped me along the way and appointed me to many opportunities and sponsored me to be able to do really incredible things. This page has many other people who were great influences in my life, including my incredible family, but many other professionals who really saw things in me, sponsored me, supported me in many ways. And that really influenced my thinking about what I wanted to do with my own career. And then things were solidified when I went to ELAM myself in 2009-10. That year was transformative for me, where I could see my potential as a leader and really articulated for myself that where my passion area was in advancing others, helping others to do what they wanted to do to make the biggest impact on patients in this country. So helping people in science and medicine do amazing things, lead amazing programs, it had me hooked. And it gives me chills to think about that impact, which is just amazing. So I lead this program called ELAM. And now we have a new program, ELH, Executive Leadership in Healthcare. It is in its 28th year. The 28th class is going to meet starting on Friday. We have 74 fellows in ELAM this year and 26 in ELH. It's our largest classes ever. We have, our main goals are to advance women in leadership positions, to support and sustain women who attain leadership positions, and ultimately to change the culture of academic medicine. And I'm going to touch on some of these important structures and concepts along the way. But I will add that to date, we have 1,275 graduates of our programs that serve in leadership positions in 300 institutions across the United States, North America, and actually the world. I share this story because it's really important for this time in our history. At the beginning of the pandemic, or right before, we were about to celebrate the 25th anniversary of ELAM. We were very excited to celebrate as a community our amazing achievements. And at that time, we're really starting to see an uptick of women into leadership positions. And then, as we know, the pandemic, so disruptive, brought everything to a screeching halt. And we were quite concerned because I was being reached out to, I told this story last night, so sorry for those of you who've heard it. I was being reached out to by search firms and search committees saying women were not putting their hat in the ring for leadership positions, department chair, dean's positions, other positions. Made sense. We were all at the front line or working to ensure that our programs were surviving, either our labs or our clinical programs. Women were not putting their hat in the ring. They were taking care of their families and lots of things. But that was really concerning because as we were moving along with women tackling all these important problems, the searches were moving on. And so we were missing out on opportunities, and we were really concerned that we would slide backwards. Fortunately, after a bunch of us got together across the country to think about this, we were able to support women going into leadership. And since January of 21, 13 of our graduates have been appointed as deans of medical schools, 3 as deans of public health schools, 1 president, 1 provost. We have a ELAM who's a finalist for Francis Collins's job. So we've had a lot of success and many, many department chairs, by the way. So we're really excited about that. And we still have a long way to go. In this next section, I'm going to share a lot of data that becomes very heavy for women in particular. So hang in there, though. I have some optimistic things to share. So as it gets heavier, you'll feel the room calm down as I talk. This is a paper I wrote before the pandemic that was published in Pediatrics with several colleagues about our workforce, pediatric workforce. And it was really a call to action. And I will read this quote. Because women comprise the majority of pediatricians in the United States, pediatrics has a unique opportunity to stand out as progressively equitable. We should be leading the way in the country. I had the good fortune in the spring to talk to the largest group of OBGYNs, educators in the country. And I said to them, I don't know why OBGYN is not partnering with pediatrics to think through these problems, because it's the only other discipline where the majority of the faculty, all the way through trainees, are women. We should be thinking creatively together. We also, have common patients involved, right? This is very current data from the AAMC, the Association of American Medical Colleges. So they track all kinds of data around our faculty, and including pay equity, for instance. This is recent data. So in December of this past year, of all faculty across medicine, every discipline, so not internal medicine, but all of medicine, 28% of our faculty are women, full professors, and 22% of our chairs are women across all disciplines. And despite, I shared those amazing numbers of 13 women coming into dean's roles in the last year, 19% of the deans are women. And we have 154 medical schools, so 19%. Very proudly, 75% of those women are ELAMs, graduates of our program, but we have never, ever broken 20%, ever. And we believe, those of us who work in the equity space, that it's not until we reach a critical mass of women in leadership that we will make big structural change in academic medicine. And critical mass is over 33%. So if you think that all these years we've been under 20%, we have a ways to go. If you think about our field, pediatrics, 39% of our full professors are women, 30% of our chairs are women. And in OBGYN, 42% of full professors are women and 34% of chairs are women. So we're kind of getting that critical mass thing in view for pediatrics and OBGYN. So I'm excited about that. I understand you have 40% full professors who are women. So you're 1% above the national average. Really exciting. It's really interesting though. ELAM has fellows from dentistry, public health, and pharmacy as well. And we are not doing that different across our field. And by the way, we've had such an attention to public health recently, right? So we need to really think about our colleagues in our fellow health professions. This is a paper published by an ELAM, Dr. Reshma Jagsi, pre-pandemic in 2019. If you're interested in gender equity work, you need to read her work. She is really the premier researcher in gender equity. She and her colleagues looked at the trajectory of when would we meet parity for chairs and deans if we go at the rate we're going. So the blue line is department chairs and the orange line are deans. So the linear forecast for medical school deans and chairs to meet parity, we will not meet parity until the year 2070. This is pre-pandemic, 2070. So to put that in perspective, our current medical students will be retired by then. I certainly will be retired by then. So that is really, really profound. How do we compare to other industries? So women in healthcare in general are 65% of our workforce and only 15% of CEOs, 29% of COOs. And why is that? Why are there more COOs? Anybody know? They come from nursing also. So we have another field that's influencing who is chosen as a COO. And I know there are COOs in this system that are nurses, CEOs, sorry, that are nurses. Another thing that is very worrisome to me is the proportion of board director chairpersons who are women are under 20%. So 17% in health systems and 21% in health insurance groups. Why is that important? Because we all report to boards. Boards are our ultimate decision makers. And so what you have is a non-diverse group of people making decisions that affect much more diverse groups along the pathway in our organizations. So we have a big effort at ELAM actually, and with our alumni to increase the number of women on boards. And it's very strategic. There are courses you can take to serve on boards. Why are boards important, by the way? And why do people want to serve on boards? People love to contribute to missions, of course. But did you know that if you serve on a corporate board, you can earn up to $230,000 a year? $250,000 a year. So if you imagine who's chosen for boards, often presidents of organizations or high-level leaders serve on boards. They already have great salaries. They're earning, they could be on 2 boards. Then when it's time for them to retire, they have those boards that they continue to work on and continue to generate income. And I know there are a lot of other reasons that they stay, but there are no term limits for boards. There are very few structured processes to ensure diversity on boards. So if you think about it, when somebody rolls off, they often suggest people who are like them or their friends to join the board. So the diversity is not being generated on the boards. So there is a lot of strategic action that needs to be taken to ensure diversity so that we have diversity at the top influencers and decision makers that are helping our institutions move forward. If we look at our medical school faculty, we all have the goal of having our faculty reflect the diversity of our patient population. And if you see here that our faculty across the country, this is across the country, only 18% Asian, 4% Black, and 4% Hispanic and Latino. So we have a long way to go. We have a majority of women in our workforce, but we don't have diversity, and certainly doesn't reflect the diversity of our patient populations. So we have some thinking to do on that end. By the way, there's a lot of attention recently on diversity in medical schools. US News and World Report put out a recent report on rankings, just like everything else, on the diversity of medical schools. So I looked you up this morning, and you're 50 out of 154. So not bad, but it's something to consider, because if our medical students are our pathway into our residency programs and faculty, we want to pay attention to that diversity as well. To be successful in academia, we need to produce scholarship. And to do that, we need funding. And so we've been thinking a lot. And by the way, the NIH is very aware of the disparities here. In fact, in the spring, I was very fortunate to be invited to a 2-day think tank around diversity of the physician scientist workforce with a special attention on gender equity. So 100 people came from around the country, experts in many different ways, to think through how can we support diversity. But one of the reasons we need to do it is look at the difference in funding between men and women in the country. And so we need to consider, how can we have a more diverse workforce? By the way, there is interesting infrastructure at the NIH that prevents diversity in leadership at the NIH. There are 27 institutes, and less than 10 of the institute leaders are women. 3 of them are ELUMs, which is really exciting. And the problem at the NIH, not a problem, but the structure at the NIH is they have an institute leader like a Dr. Tony Fauci, who's retiring now, right? So we have an opportunity for a new person. But there are no term limits on those positions. Dr. Fauci's been in his role, I think, for 50 years. And he's been amazing, right? We're all very grateful to him. Having said that, there's an institute leader, and then there are lab and branch chief leader positions, and that's really it. So when you go to the NIH, there are very few opportunities for leadership growth, leadership succession planning, et cetera. So the infrastructure of leadership at the NIH is not very diverse. How does that influence what science is being done? How does that influence what happens on the extramural side with who is getting funded? There's a lot of interesting things to consider going forward with structure. Pay equity. Okay, I told you it's going to get low here. This is a serious thing. We're going to get happy in a minute. Many of you have heard of this Equal Pay Day in the United States. So this is not specific to medicine or our healthcare industry. Equal Pay Day is the day that all the women in the country need to work until we match pay the men in the country made on December 31st, the year prior. So Equal Pay Day for all women in the country was March 15th. March 3rd for Asian American, Native, Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander women. And then you can see underneath each of those the cents to the dollar that is being made. June 15th, LGBTQ. By the way, there's not enough data to really understand that wage gap. September 8th, Mom's Equal Pay Day. For those of us who are mothers, we have to work until then. September 21st, Black Women's Equal Pay Day. November 30th, Native Women's Equal Pay Day. And this one really is just so painful for me. December 8th, Latino Women's Equal Pay Day. By the way, that's my birthday, so you can write that down. We have been focused quite a bit in the last 10 years, but amplified since George Floyd's death, on thinking about diversity and structural issues that don't help us with diversity. But we've really been thinking for many, many years about gender diversity and race and ethnicity diversity, which are incredibly important, but there's so many other factors to consider. This is the diversity wheel from Johns Hopkins. So it's easily downloadable if you want to take a closer look. The inner part of the wheel are aspects of diversity that are generally, we don't change over time and are more visible. And all the things on the exterior are things that are maybe invisible. Ideally, we should be thinking about our workforce in diversity in many, many, many dimensions. And there are a lot of challenges to doing that. We have challenges, and I work very closely with the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Office in my own medical school. There are considerations around privacy, how we ask the questions, whether people feel comfortable answering those questions. So how are we even going to capture the data to know what diversity we have and where we need to drive to? So we have a lot of important work to do here. I mentioned the issues of concern right now have been amplified during COVID-19. And this is a quote from one of my colleagues, Dr. Eve Higginbotham. If you remember, I shared, women weren't putting their hat in the ring. They weren't allowing the opportunity for advancement because they wanted to really take care of what needed to happen. And Eve Higginbotham, who's the Dean of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion at Penn, and an Elam, said this: if institutions do not aggressively correct for the issues we're seeing, we will see fewer women being promoted to professor to leadership positions, and it's just going to look like the 1950s again. Very concerning. Luckily, we're seeing some forward movement. I have to say very proudly, many of the organizations that lead efforts around focusing on diversity, equity, inclusion for healthcare, we are moving across our silos and working together for the first time. And so I'm very excited about that. If we can all come together, leverage our influence and our power and our ideas to make big change, that will help us quite a bit. There's another phenomenon that I just want to mention. This is an article I published in 2020. We wrote it pre-pandemic, it was published at the beginning of the pandemic. And it focuses on the invisibility of the mid-career woman in medicine and academic medicine. And otherwise known as the Jennifer syndrome. The reason we call it that is there are many, many people in this career stage right now named Jennifer. And I'll tell you a funny story. I was the keynote speaker at the COMSEP meeting, the Council on Medical Subspecialty Pediatrics. I'm sorry, medical student group, COMSEP. And I was checking in, and the woman ahead of me had lost her name badge. And she went up to the woman and said, could I have another name badge? And the woman at the desk said, what's your name? And she said, I'm Jennifer. And the woman said, there are a lot of Jennifers here. So, and my friends named Jennifer agree with this phenomenon here, which is at the mid-career stage, something unique happens for women in particular. When you're a medical student, a resident, a fellow, chief resident, your chief resident's right here, you're looked at as a superstar. When you're doing great things, people are really excited to work for you. They want you on their team. They want you in their residency program. They want you for their fellowship. Then all of a sudden, as you enter into mid-career, which is when you're developing your own scholarship and your own kind of place in the world, you start competing with people. And all of a sudden, things come to a screeching halt, and you're not as celebrated as you're not given as many opportunities. And there's a real struggle. When I talk to faculty who are struggling a little bit about whether they want to leave medicine or not, or leave academia or not, I always say, how many years out of training are you? They always tell me 7 to 9 years. It's a really tough time. And that often for many people, that's when families are growing. So there's a lot of competing priorities for people at that time. So we need to focus on mid-career faculty, mid-career women. And then I will add, a really scary thing for me recently has been women of color at mid-career are really considering leaving. And I've had many conversations with senior people who are mentoring women who are women of color at mid-career, who are telling me their mentees are leaving medicine. They're not just leaving to go to practice, they're leaving medicine. And I just had 2 calls within the last month of outstanding people who are really just done, burned out. They feel, one woman said to me, I've been a Black woman for 50 years. I'm exhausted. I'm tired of everybody watching me and having this phenomenon happen at the same time. It's really hard. So I think we really have to be thoughtful about how to support our faculty. So, okay, let's talk about the positive things. How do we move the needle? Well, first of all, there's some data we have to think about. Diversity begets diversity. So this is a study that looked at emergency medicine residency programs. Programs with a higher percentage of female residents have a strongly positive correlation of female chief residents. So there's a really interesting phenomenon there. This I'd love to share. It's important to have diversity. Patients treated by female physicians have a lower odds of death and readmission. Isn't that amazing? I would like to go to a woman physician. By the way, there's a concordance. You're more likely as a woman to survive a heart attack if you're taken care of by a woman physician. There's really some very interesting data that we have to consider. There was a study done in New England Journal of Medicine Catalyst, somewhere during the pandemic, it was published, that looked at our favorite activity, the electronic health record. And they looked at the amount of time men and women spent in the EHR. Women spent more time documenting, were faster to react to abnormal labs, and faster to call back a patient. Isn't that interesting? Other diversity studies. Healthcare studies showed patients generally fare better when care was provided from diverse teams. Professional skills focused studies generally find improvements to innovation team communication. And this is interesting, improved risk assessment. We do better with risk assessment when we have diversity on our groups. And this is great for our institutions, but financial performance is better when we have diverse teams. And this is reflected in the business world as well. Students trained at diverse schools are more comfortable treating patients from a wide range of ethnic backgrounds. There's so many wonderful influences to having and impacts to having diversity. So how do we build this pathway to equity? We have to think about systems changes. For years and years and years, the burden of change was on the people who were underrepresented. And for so many years, ELAM has said, we have to move away from fixing the woman to fixing the system. We have to pay attention to our structures. We have to think who's making the decisions for a diverse group of more junior people. We have to think about policies along the entire life cycle. Forever, we have been thinking about the pathway in. How do we recruit people to our medical schools, to our residency programs, to our faculty positions? We forget that there's an entire life cycle, which I'm going to show you in a minute. We have to pay attention to every aspect, including thinking mid-career and even exit. How do we help people retire so that there is an opportunity for people to advance? We have to be careful about governance. How is the diversity in our governance? And by the way, there's a phenomenon that happens in our institutions, and this is across the country, is women tend to have leadership roles that are education-based, very mission-based, but not where they have resource allocation power. So if you look at the structure of organizations, the dean, the vice dean of research, they tend to be men more often. Women have dean of diversity, equity, and inclusion, dean of faculty, dean of women, obviously. So we tend to serve in those roles. I serve in those roles. I love my role. And we have to think strategically about how to make sure women and underrepresented in medicine have roles in resource allocation positions. And we have to think about our professional societies as well. My colleague, Dr. Julie Silver, if you want to follow her on Twitter, has done a tremendous amount of work in the last couple of years calling out our professional organizations, diversity of who's receiving awards, who's who are the presidents, et cetera, et cetera. But we have to be very intentional. We do better in pediatrics, and we have been doing better, but we could still do better. And then we have to think about what metrics do we want to track that are meaningful and follow them carefully. We have to think more creatively about our appointments and promotions guidelines. And we have been doing this nationally. The Group on Faculty Affairs at the AAMC has convened several groups thinking, how can we be more creative and innovative about rewarding very important areas of service that contribute to the excellence of our organizations, but are not always appropriately recognized or acknowledged or rewarded. So there are a couple of taxes: the citizenship tax, the underrepresented medicine tax, and the majority subsidy. This is the citizenship tax is we have to do service to fulfill the missions of our hospital. We have to serve on committees. We have to do searches. We have to do all of these things. And we want diversity on our committees, particularly our searches, so that we can optimize the opportunity to decrease unconscious bias and increase our diversity in our pools and our final selection. Well, what happens is when you're underrepresented in some way in your field, so if you're in orthopedics and you're a woman orthopedic surgeon, or you're a woman with intersectionality, multiple dimensions of diversity, you are going to be overtapped because they need diversity. So you're going to be asked over and over and over again. And unfortunately, that means that others are undertapped. So those in the majority have more time to spend in the lab, write papers, generate RVUs, and you will have less time if you're underrepresented to do those things. So again, we have to think about how are we going to reward the work of diversity, mission-based work, so that everybody gets promoted to professor. Other drivers of change, we have to think about individuals, allies, leaders, institution, and organizational structure. I mentioned earlier, the critical piece of this, I think, is to develop a significant culture of mentorship, sponsorship, and allyship. And we all have to work together to do this. And the majority, so that I'm speaking to the white men, need to do this work. The burden is on you. So when we think about our network, I like to think about it from three standpoints. This is an article from Ibera, who does a lot of work around thinking about networks. And a lot of her work, by the way, is published in the Harvard Business Review. If you're interested in leadership at all, I would subscribe to the Harvard Business Review. It's great. The reads are short. The ideas often that we bring into leadership in medicine come from business. So they're ahead of us in many regards. So this article talks about thinking about your network and how to tend to it. And the three components that she describes are operational, personal, and strategic. Operational networks are the networks that we have every day to get our everyday work done, to see patients, to get the work done in our labs. We all have the people in our lives in those networks who know everything, can get anything done. For me, it's my boss, my dean's executive assistant. It doesn't matter what the problem is. She can get it done. She also can help me out of political catastrophe. I always call her first to find out what next steps I should do and who I should email, or how does that person like to receive information, that type of thing. Those operational networks we need to tend to. Our personal networks are the networks of people who have passion in our areas. They're national networks. That's why we go to national meetings, to meet people who do the work we do. For me, it's the faculty affairs group, the people who do leadership development across the country. It is so energizing, so exciting, gives you opportunities to collaborate, to combine resources to do things, to think about innovation. Really fun, but we've had a really difficult time in the last couple of years nurturing and gaining those networks. I've talked to many residents and fellows who've struggled because they haven't had the opportunity to go to those national meetings in person and meet all the great people who are going to help them in their career. The network piece that we pay attention to is the strategic network. The strategic network is understanding who are the influencers and the leaders, the vision setters. We need to connect with them and understand what they're doing. It's your department chair, your CEO, the president of your national organization. You need to understand what their vision is and hear what they're saying so that you can see where you fit in and how you align and how can you help. By the way, that's something I've been telling my mentees and my faculty all the last 2 years. Everybody goes to every leader right now with a request or a complaint. We have a joke in my own dean's office that everybody in my faculty, my 3,000 faculty, think my dean has an ATM machine in his office, and only if he would give them the pin, their life would be perfect. I always say to faculty, go to him and say, how can I help? What can I do? You know, that's really powerful. Anyway, if you know what the vision is and where things are going, you can figure out where you fit in. We tend to not go to opportunities to hear the strategy. I heard you had a state of the department last week. I hope you were all there. I hope everybody listens to that. That's really critically important. When we're at our national meetings, I always say, go to the awards, the opening ceremonies, the award ceremonies. They're critically important. What I notice is, this is a phenomenon, all the senior people go up to the front of the room because they know each other and their friends are getting the awards, so they want to be there to support them. And they have nothing to do but hang out and talk. All the junior people or mid-level people are maybe in the back of the room, or they're out for their run or shopping, depending on the city. You're missing a great opportunity because there are two pieces to that. One is when people receive awards, they tell their story and you get to hear. It's just like such a wealth of information. And you also have an opportunity at breaks to meet all those famous people that you want to network with because they have nothing to do. And if you're an introvert, a shy introvert, please get your extroverted friend to take you up to the front to introduce yourself to these famous people. In our networks, women are over-mentored and under-sponsored. And that is why one of the reasons why we're not advancing. And it's really important. This is true in business. Mentoring is obviously incredibly important. We have multiple roles. We report to multiple people. We're trying to do our unique scholarship. We are trying to do the best for our patients and all the other activities we want to do. But we have constant and rapid change right now. And mentoring really provides the stability. And so we are very aware of the basic models of mentoring, dyadic in particular. I would advocate peer mentorship right now has never been more important. So that how we mentor each other through all these difficult times. And as I mentioned, this is from the business world, Ibera again, in business, women tended to have at least one mentor and more likely to have 4 or more, but less likely to get promoted. And why is that? They're not sponsored. And what is sponsorship? Sponsorship sort of is on that continuum with mentoring, but sponsorship is different in that your sponsor has to have power, recognize potential in you, and use their power to catapult you to the next level, to provide you with an award opportunity or a committee opportunity, something beyond your reach if you were trying to do it yourself. They are putting themselves on the line to help you get there. But what's interesting about sponsorship is it doesn't end with that, okay, I got you on that committee. The sponsor will then teach you the politics, help you understand why this network is important or this skill acquisition is important, really help you be successful in that role. By the way, there's a reciprocal piece in that you as a sponsee need to do a good job and remember to thank and acknowledge your sponsor and not just get rid of them and get another sponsor. You know, that happens sometimes. So again, women tend to have fewer sponsors than men. And one of the concerns I have in our organizations is we need to think more thoughtfully about where are people sponsored and when. And I have to share a quick story, which some of you may have heard before. I had the opportunity to, I often go to site visits like for consultation. And I was at a very prominent, very prestigious, large institution. First, I went to the medical school and then I went to the healthcare side. The first day on the visit, I went and met all the faculty. I always meet the faculty first because you hear the real scoop. Then I go and meet with the leaders. So I met with all the faculty. Then I met with the dean. He was a white man, wonderful guy, big supporter of ELAM. And he was very receptive to, like, he was telling me all these great things about what were happening with diversity and inclusion for women and underrepresented in his school. And I shared a few ideas and he was very receptive. Then I went over to the healthcare system side, and it was a classic situation where I went up in an elevator to the top floor, and there were beautiful offices around the perimeter with beautiful windows with beautiful views. And all of those offices were populated by white men and one woman who was the CNO. In the middle, all the women were doing the administrative work. So that was the setting. This is within the last year. The faculty, quite diverse, by the way. The rating of the diversity of that medical school, significantly higher than yours. A lot of diversity, but if you think about that disparity. So I went in and I met with the CEO, and I have a witness, my associate dean came with me, and he was telling me about how wonderful his team was, his C-suite team, how they made great decisions. They were robust, efficient, effective, fast. All the words he used, by the way, were agentic. Those are associated with male leadership. Then he said, we are such a good team. We are such a great team. We make such great decisions. We get along so well. We even play golf every Saturday. He actually said that to me. And I thought, oh my gosh, you know, where are the most important decisions for that institution being made? When? Who's there, right? So really important to think about sponsorship, and we need to think more diversely about sponsorship. We know sponsorship is critical for advancement, and it's critical for Black women, women of color, in their advancement and their development of their network. By the way, there's a whole role for coaches out there I'm not going to go into, but I want you to be aware that professional coaches are out there and being used more and more and more. It's a booming business. I have a whole cadre of coaches with ELAM to help our fellows and faculty advance. And I share this because executives often have coaches. So your leaders may have coaches. They're already more senior than you, and they have coaches. So you're negotiating against power with power. So just think about that. And there are appropriate times for all of us to think about coaches. And I'm happy to talk about that later. For individuals, we have to be strategic about our own career planning and their methods to do that. And we have to think about allyship, which I'll talk about at the end. Leadership training is incredibly, incredibly important. We need to think about leadership training for everyone, and it's especially important for women. And ELAM is one of the only programs in the world for the level that we're at to help women advance. So we need to do more to support leadership development across everybody. By the way, a lot of people will say, why is there not more leadership training for men? And I say, there should be more leadership training for men. We all need leadership training. For leaders, we have to think about not having a sole woman at the table with decision-making. Women who are one or two or three of a group, there's a lot of power dynamic there. And so I think in this institution, the number of chairs, the number of men are hugely more than the women. So that puts women at a big disadvantage. They're more vulnerable. Their opinions aren't always heard. By the way, I am still in executive meetings today where I will make a comment, and it's not until 2 down that the male colleague of mine makes the same comment that everybody's like, that is a great idea. So we have to think very carefully about those dynamics. We have to think about our policies, procedures. We have to think about how we're going to help women re-enter the workforce. I mentioned this life cycle. This is from the AAMC, Vigiano. The whole life cycle, remember I told you we focus so much on coming in, entry point, recruitment, but we don't talk about all these other things that have to happen in retention. And we have to think about this exit and re-entry piece. I added that actually to the slide. I'm very worried about that. We have to think about how to help people come back in and retirement. My father retired at 78. From the time he was 70 on from Brown Medical School, he would say, one more year, one more year, one more year. And I would say to him, Dad, if you don't leave, nobody can get your job. And we had this really interesting tension. No, we have no term limits in medicine, generally. Mayo Clinic does. We have to think strategically about how to help men gracefully exit, or everybody exit the field, and how can they contribute going forward, and where is the succession plan? Okay. We have to think about metrics for our institutions and be very transparent. I've been advocating that our organizations have to do this as well. And I'm part of a big collaborative with 10 organizations, professional societies, and we're thinking how to create common metrics that we can all follow so we can look across fields, surgery, OB, peds, medicine, et cetera. And organizations really have to take an equity pledge and then be very transparent with our metrics, again, around awards and leadership positions. And then we have to think about our policies and procedures going forward. If you had told me 10 years ago that my dean's job would be a huge amount to do with policymaking, I would have said, I'm not taking that job. No way, I don't want that job. I have learned the power of these policies. It's incredible. First of all, bringing people together to create meaningful policies that can affect real change in our institutions is really important. But our policies can't live in our real or electronic filing cabinets. They have to be out there active, and we have to make them happen. And finally, I'm going to end with this allyship concept. Allyship is really where we need to focus right now. As I mentioned, we have to get away from thinking women need to fix these problems or underrepresented groups need to fix the problems. The majority have to fix these problems. And that is true for men helping women, but white women need to be effective allies for women of color, because we're all experiencing things in a very different way. Monica Lipson, who's an Elam, who's now the Dean of Education at Columbia, talks about allyship this way. First, she thinks about inclusion, the ABCs: A, acceptance; B, belonging; C, community. Allies need to affirm belonging, address harm, stand up and speak out. It puts allies at risk. There is certain risk here. So we have to be very strategic about how to support allyship. I think every single person in healthcare needs upstander training. I have been in really high level situations where things have happened, gone terribly wrong, and nobody, even high level leaders in the diversity space, everybody freezes. So we need to do better of how to intervene and be effective that way. Senior level women are more likely than men to be allies, to practice allyship. So we have to think of this as everybody needs to do this. And unfortunately, very few colleagues of ours in the LGBTQ community feel that colleagues are allies at work. So we need to do better. Monica says we need to take allyship to the next level. This quote from Niddle: "If I'm already an ally, why do I need to transition to a co-conspirator? To put it simply, being an ally is lazy." So conspiracy, that term, is created when two people intentionally form an agreement and intend to achieve it through some act or preparation. A co-conspirator is one who chooses to take part in the conspiracy and deliberately acknowledges that there is a structural problem. We need more active engagement of everybody, of men and women, in this process. And finally, I want to leave you with this really fun thing. So years ago, pre-pandemic, a group of us in academic medicine partnered with the women's national soccer team over pay equity. Who would have thought? See, we're trying to be strategic, outside the box thinkers. The story here, which most of you know, is the women's national soccer team won 2 World Cups. The men won nothing. And they were getting such a lower pay than the men. It was incredible. So they did a big class action lawsuit, and they just were awarded $24 million in back pay. So really exciting. And finally, I'm going to leave you with, this is a little girl, her mother, Omalara Medimo, who is a pediatrician, actually. I met Omalara through social media. This is her daughter, and she's going to sum up in 1 second what I just talked about for 50 minutes. So I'm hoping she's a future president of the United States. So thank you.